Today's scripture reading is from the Gospel of Luke in the New Testament, chapter 6, verses 27 through 36. But to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because he is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. This is God's word.
Well, good morning. Welcome to all of you who are joining us live streaming online, and to all of you here this beautiful, if not a bit breezy day at Axelrad. Before we start reflecting on the words that Joy just read for us, I wanted to add a personal word to Link's word about his news. Talking about mixed emotions, it is, first of all, I just couldn't be more excited for you, Link. This is an extraordinary opportunity that you'll learn more about that Link is getting. I mean, it's very cool. Pastors just don't tend to get these kinds of opportunities. But there's no getting around the fact that this is tough as well. It's a good tough, but it's going to take a while for us to get to where it feels good. It's a lot more tough at this point. And so I know you'll be praying for Link and his family and joining us, hopefully here on a spectacular day at Axelrad on February 14th. But regardless, if you're not able to be here online, really important day to honor the Ashbys and celebrate God's work in and through them at City Church throughout our history. Now, let's reflect on the words that were just given to us. Now, we're in a series in the New Testament book of Luke called Considering Christ. The author of the book, Luke, a physician, highly educated, his introduction to the book, many scholars would say, is among the most sophisticated, elegant Greek in antiquity. Luke makes a case. He said, look, I've done a great deal of consideration. I have gathered eyewitness testimony. I have really studied them. And I've come to my own conclusions as I've considered Christ. And then in a respectful way, he invites his reader, he invites you and me to come enter into a similar process, to really consider the person of Jesus. It's as though right off the bat he's saying, I've considered Jesus. Have you? And therefore, it's really a question for each of us to enter into. Now, he's not saying, I want you to get more religious. I want you to become a better person. But he's holding up for us the person of Jesus. And this two-part series that we're in, that'll take us through Easter, through basically mid-April, is all about that. Holding up, considering who the person of Jesus is. Don't let yourself get confused by things that tend to interfere, but focus on what is most crucial, the person of Jesus. And then you might get to the point where you actually discover him at a personal experiential level. Reminds me of the words of G.K. Chesterton in his fabulous book, Orthodoxy, that I'm rereading right now. He said, I am the man who, with the utmost daring, discovered what had been discovered before. Innumerable people throughout history have discovered Jesus, and he's inviting us, Luke is, on this journey. Now, the passage we're looking at today is from Luke's version of the Sermon on the Mount. After he goes through an introduction, his first subject that he holds out for us to really give consideration to is love. Now, is there anything that's more attractive? Is there anything that's more needed? What the world needs now, right? Wow, does the world need love? Does our country need it? Do we need it personally? And yet, when you look at the version of love that Jesus holds out for us, you got to be careful, because we tend to think of love in sort of a flowery, sentimental way. Jesus' love has a ruthlessness to it. There are teeth to his love in a way that if you really listen to him and understand it, you might say, that is utterly outrageous. It'll knock your feet out from under you. So let's think about this love. The outrageous commitment or command that he's calling us to, the great reward, and then thirdly, finally, the economics of grace. First of all, the outrageous command. In Jesus' words, you find what's commonly called the golden rule. Did you hear it as Joy read it to you? Now, this is kind of this ethic of reciprocity that a lot of people have pointed out through the ages. You find common to most great philosophies and religions. Before Jesus, evidently, it was only found in its negative form. Don't do to people what you wouldn't want them to do to you. Jesus comes in and says, no, let's put it in the positive. Do unto others. See, it's not asking less of us, it's asking more of us, actually. Be proactive. Do to others what you would really want them to do to you. Now, liberal scholars sometimes will look at the block of teaching of Jesus and say, I'm not really sure what we need today, what is applicable to our lives today. So it's playing the part of a sculptor. They take a chisel and sort of chip away at the teaching of Jesus, and yet I don't know any that have chipped away at this part. They'll say, it's like the golden nugget of his truth, the thing that remains is the golden rule. And why not? I mean, it is so attractive to us and refreshing and not really outrageous at all. But don't stop there, because Jesus doesn't stop there. Jesus begins to put that teeth into the golden rule, because on the surface of it, it might seem innocuous, but when you listen to it, what you see, what you hear is revolutionary. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. And so you say, no, wait a minute, is Jesus telling me that I should just let people walk all over me? What is he doing with boundaries? And is he trying to enable destructive behavior? Absolutely not. Why do I know that? Well, just very briefly, context. What comes right before it and right after it? The words that come right before it, his introduction, it's a series of woes. And a woe, that's biblical shorthand for judgment. It's reflective of a God who at the core is passionate, you see, about justice, specifically about defending the cause of the poor, the populations that are on the margin and more at risk. He is their God, and he's there to champion them. So absolutely, he wouldn't say there's no way, whatever this means, it could not possibly mean that it's there to empower someone who victimizes someone else, that we should do away with responsible psychological boundaries in our life. No, that's not what he means. And then the words that come after it, he says this. It's a familiar statement of Jesus talking about judgment. How can you say, let me take the speck out of your eye, when you yourself fail to see the speck in your own eye? You hypocrite, which means someone who's just playing around. They're pretending. You hypocrite. First take the plank out of your eye, then you'll see clearly to remove the speck from your brother or sister's eye. So he's not saying, don't speak up, just stuff your emotions, pretend that someone isn't harming you. No, he's not saying that at all. What is he saying? He's saying we've all got our own junk to deal with. The healthy path in each of our lives is to deal with our stuff first, to take the little plank out of our eye. A speck, when you pull it up and close to your eye, it becomes a plank. It might be actually less substantive than the injury someone has brought to you, but we've all got the planks in our eye. We've got to deal with that stuff. And sandwiched between these two things, the woes and the deal with your stuff before you go to someone else, is this statement, love your enemies and do good to those who hate you. So he's talking about dealing with stuff that's inside of us. So with that in mind, who's your enemy? Now, the enemy can, of course, be someone that is obvious. And I bet as soon as we say that, I bet virtually everyone can think of an enemy, someone that you have very harsh emotions toward. And that's part of the way we should apply this. But I want to suggest to you that it's a lot more sneaky, the way that this needs to be applied, the way that hate gets into our heart, because it tends to occur in the mundane. It tends to be with people that are part of just the ordinary warp and woof of our life. It might not be someone necessarily that you have already put up a boundary against and distanced yourself from. It might be someone who's on your favorites list that you hang out with a lot. But something's happened kind of in the invisible undercurrent of a relationship, and it now needs to be dealt with. Think of that person in addition. And he's saying the way that we love them, he goes on to say in verse 27, 28, is to do good things to those who've hurt you. So in other words, it's not just at the attitudinal level, it's at the behavioral level. But it begins there at the inside attitudinal level and works out. And bless those who curse you. Now, blessing sounds like a very religious term, doesn't it? Blessing and cursing actually are not distinctly religious terms. To bless someone means to speak well of them. To curse someone means the converse, that you're not speaking well of them. It might mean that you're gossiping about someone. What he is saying is, you know that you are truly loving those who've injured you if you are speaking well of them. It's kind of evidence that the inside work is beginning actually to work, and praying even for them. You say, yeah, I know how to pray for people. God, heap judgment. And there are these what they call imprecatory Psalms you may have run across in the Old Testament book of Psalms, where it just seems like the psalmist is calling down vengeance upon certain people. That is true. And again, you go to therapists, and I've had a therapist recently helping me say, look, it is very important, very healthy that you know what your emotions are and that you own them, and don't try to short circuit around your actual emotional state. That's what's going on in a lot of those imprecatory prayers in the Psalms. It's what's going along in our lives. It's just not the end of the story. It's a process that we need to go through. And instead of getting to the place where we're just praying for that person to get the speck out of their eye, we're all of a sudden starting to pray for their well-being. And you say, well, that is absolutely outrageous. You're beginning to understand what Jesus was talking about. It is an outrageous command. And there's 3 quick word pictures. We don't have time to go into much detail on this, but if someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. Now, if you really want to take someone down, you probably don't go about it by slapping them. Think of the expression, boy, that was a slap in the face. What are you saying? You're saying that was an insult. It wasn't so much a shot to you physically as it was to you emotionally, psychologically, to your identity. It was a shot to your ego. See, that's really what he's getting at here. So the enemy is someone who's insulted you, who's slapped you around, so to speak. The second image, if someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them also. Now, the Greek word for shirt there actually is more like undershirt. And so the imagery is fairly vivid here. In other words, if someone takes something of the externals of your life from you, allow yourself to go the extra mile, to be utterly vulnerable and exposed, to be spiritually, psychologically naked before them, is what he's saying. It's vulnerability, which is a sign of real maturity, but most of us approach that rarely. The third image that Jesus gives, is give to everyone who asks of you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, don't demand it back. Now, of course, we can apply this at so many different levels. We can apply it economically as well. There's economic language later in the text that we'll talk about. But again, this is a figure of speech like the other two illustrative mechanisms Jesus has used here to drive home the point: love your enemy. And what is he saying? He's saying there should be in each of us an obvious, extravagant generosity in our relationships. Now, all of these things we need to remember fall under this outrageous command to love our enemies. And you may know in Greek there's a number of different words for love, but lo and behold, this is that Greek word agape. And again, culturally, we tend to think of loving someone as you got to get the feelings first in the right place, and then the actions follow the feelings. No. Jesus says that doesn't do you any good. That's not the kind of love I'm talking about. This is an outrageous command because the feelings actually aren't there. You are exercising a commitment, a sacrifice, a generosity in advance of actually feeling that way. It's doing the gritty work of treating people well, especially when you don't think they deserve it and you don't feel it. And I really think until we see this command this way, until we're hearing Jesus this way, to where we come to the conclusion, this is absolutely outrageous. Man, this is stupid. I cannot do this. Until we come to that point, we haven't really understood it. So have you come to that point? And as you think about those people that might be in the obvious category of enemy in your life, or they might just as well be on your favorites list, but there's an injury there. Are you able to get your mind around that? Why would you ever want to get your mind around loving them in this way? Well, let's look at that next. That's outrageous command. Secondly, and that is the longest point, great reward. Jesus was never advocating, he wasn't here, kind of a stoic ethic. Do this because it's the right thing to do. There was always a sense of appropriate reward connected to these commands of Jesus. And you realize with what he's saying here, there's a pretty phenomenal return here. There's continuing to use the psychological, spiritual language. There's a psychological return and a spiritual return. First of all, the psychological return. When someone harms you, it is normal, as we've said, to have intense emotions like anger. You might even feel like if you're honest, being honest with those emotions, that, yeah, okay, there's a sense in which I hate that person, as terrible as that may sound to verbalize. Those kinds of emotions, though, are interesting as we begin to work this process with them. They can tease us. They can tempt us, can't they? They can tease you into thinking that if you just let yourself settle there, that it will give to you a reward. There'll be a satisfaction to it. That person kind of deserves it, right? You say to yourself. But actually, they're like a friend. You might have had a friend that needed a place to stay for a couple of days. Sure, come on over and stay for a couple of days. A couple of weeks later, you're going, oh my gosh, do they realize? When are they going to leave? This friend has become like a fish that hangs around for a couple of weeks. That's what happens with these emotions that we allow to become our home. They become this space that actually traps us, and instead of yielding a reward of freedom, they leave us embittered. What Jesus is saying here is there is a kind of reward that if you work like yeast into dough, what I'm telling you, into the dough of your raw emotions, it will yield a kind of freedom that will be unmistakably rewarding. That's the psychological aspect. The spiritual aspect, he says, you will be children of the Most High. You're going to have very great reward, and you will be children of the Most High. Most High is an expression of royalty, of course. And what it's saying is that this kind of outrageous love that can flow from your life, if it gets itself into you, reveals, it doesn't make you, it reveals that you're a child of the King. It shows you've got a symptom that you've caught the real disease from above, so to speak, because you resemble your Father, the ultimate Father, the Most High, who, quote, is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. He's the King of another land. And this really is at the heart of the vision of this church. It should be the heart of the vision of the church, because what it's saying is the church is kind of a colony of this other kingdom. We live in the kingdom of this world, but we have this vital connectivity because we're children of another world, and that world is a world of extravagant love and generosity. We get to be this presence of that kingdom in this world. Yes, it's a kind of love that's alien to us because it is literally alien. And so, I think the real problem or challenge becomes for each of us that there is this other kingdom that's really more dominant in our lives. And a lot of times I think church cultures don't allow us to be honest about that. If you're a Christian, then that means that you are, quote, happy all the day, as an old hymn puts it. That means that you've got your life ordered. The emotions of your life are all aligned the way they're supposed to be. Can I be blunt? That's ridiculous. We're very much in process. And as Francis Schaeffer once said, what we can expect in this life is substantial healing over time, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's realize that we're in process and that there's a lot more of the kingdom of this world that is alien to the kingdom of the Most High that's controlling us. And so this turns out not to be just incidentally difficult, but demonstrably impossible. So how do we do it? Let's look at that last. The economics of grace. First, outrageous command, great reward, and then the economics of grace. Did you notice all the economic vocabulary, all the financial terms? If you love those who love you, what credit is it to you? If you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is it to you? And he does it a third time, actually. It's very interesting language, isn't it? When you combine it with the earlier reference, there's a lot of financial economic vocabulary in here. And I think one way to understand it is that, of course, in all of our relationships of life, there is a ledger always at work. You say, well, I failed accounting in school, or I tried to avoid all of that. Look, we all get intuitively what he's talking about here. Someone injures you, there is now a debit on their ledger. And if that keeps happening and you don't do the hard work internally of getting to a place of forgiveness, then of course there becomes this massive deficit there in that relationship that they've got with you. But if you can forgive someone, that makes all the difference. But Jesus says, what we tend to do is we just forgive people, we just love people that are lovable. It's people that don't have a deficit. They just got all these credits already on the relational ledger with us. And he's saying, that doesn't do you any benefit. There's no credit to that. You can do that if all you've got are the resources of the kingdom of this world. To get the alien resources, you got to do something much more difficult. See? And so what's very interesting, I think, to me, and you don't see, unfortunately, in the English translation, is the word credit here that he uses repeatedly. In the Greek, it's actually the Greek word charis. You may know, but I wouldn't expect you to know, that is ordinarily translated grace. Isn't that fascinating? So he's saying, if you love someone who's lovable, or if to really date myself, if you ever watched the series MASH from way long ago, this ridiculous character, Frank Burns, was saying to this woman, he had a thing for her. She said, well, you're so nice. He said, oh, well, it's nice to be nice to the nice. Well, of course it is. That's the easy thing to do, to be nice to the nice. But Jesus is saying, you don't get any credit for that. Now, use grace. There's no grace required for that. You can operate just the resources of this world. But to love the person that you've got issues with, that requires the alien grace of God. Paul says something intriguing in Romans 5. He says, when we were enemies of God, we were reconciled to him through the death of his Son. You say, wait a minute, I thought you said that we were children of the Most High. Vaulted status. That's not where things started. Naturally, we started off in a pretty rocky place with God. All humans do. Because in our own way, we have as a race, but every single one of us in our own way has told God that we can do life on our own. We have, in essence, rebelled. That is tantamount to cosmic treason. It is a spiritual insurrection, to use a word that has been used frequently. And therefore, what it means is that we now have a massive love deficit in our relationship with the Lord. What are we to do about that? The good news of Christianity is that exactly what Paul was alluding to with the Romans, that God is a God who loves not just the people that are lovable, he loves his enemies. And he moves in. How did he do that? The Most High became most low, and he sent his perfect Son, the only one with no deficit on his ledger, in order to live the life that you and I couldn't live, accruing all that goodness for us, and yet going to the point of suffering to death, so that there might be that great exchange where we receive all that Jesus is due, and all that we are due is placed on his shoulder. Before he was nailed to the cross, his clothes were taken from him and divided up and given away, but not just his outer garments, he was stripped naked. He was utterly, you see, vulnerable on the cross for you and me. And people were hurling insults, cursing him, but he continued to bless them, even praying for them. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. That is extravagant generosity, to say the least. And how does that kind of economics of grace get worked out into our life? I think when we grasp at a very heart level, in the moment where we feel that hatred, that bitterness, that emotional wrongdoing with someone, when we grasp what God, who should treat us as an enemy, has treated us by sending his Son to literally die to show us how much he loved us, that should melt our hearts and move us out with that kind of extravagant love and generosity. It's allowing grace to interrupt us in the mundane moments of our relational life, that we might allow his outrageous love to overcome the petty hatred in our hearts. And when we do that, I think we begin to experience the reward of freedom in our lives personally. And we also find that it begins to move us from just considering Christ to being captivated by the one who is love incarnate, and preparing us at each step of the way, each micro decision, to interrupt that hatred with grace. It's taking us down this pathway that ultimately will lead us one day into the presence of the Most High, where we will behold him in the extraordinary, spectacular glory of his everlasting presence. And with the utmost daring, we will have discovered what innumerable people have discovered before, that he is our very great reward. Father, thank you for the gift of your grace that interrupts our lives. Would you, by your Spirit, make that real today, this week in our life, that we might not be stuck in the cold and dark places of our emotions, but that we might process through them and find you to be our very great reward. In Jesus' name, amen.